Hi, my name is Paula Ekstrom. I'm the president of the League of Women Voters of McHenry County, and I would like to welcome all of you here tonight and thank the student life people from McHenry County College. Kara's back there. She was waving a little while ago. There will be league members at the table outside and the auditorium after the presentation if anybody has any questions about the league or about early voting sites and times. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization that does not promote or endorse candidates, but does, after careful study, take positions on issues. The League of Women Voters began advocating for the position of eliminating the Electoral College in 1970, and in the position that all votes should be counted equal and be of equal importance. I would like to introduce the presenter for this evening, Barb Lymans from the Wheaton League of Women Voters, and her partner here, Rosemary Heileman from the Deerfield League of Women Voters, who was instrumental in putting this presentation together. We will be taking questions after the presentation. Please use the cards that were passed out at the door and submit the questions. If you have a question on a card, hold it up and someone from the league will come and collect that. League members will be doing that throughout the presentation. And for those of you on Zoom, please use the chat to submit questions. Okay, without any more, I will turn this over to Barb Lymans to present the presentation on eliminating the Electoral College.
Welcome to hear the league presentation on abolishing the Electoral College. This is a critical issue for our country, and this presentation will give you the reasons why the League of Women Voters supports a direct popular vote to elect our president and our vice president. We'll start by sharing the basics. What is the Electoral College? And what is the League of Women Voters' position on this method of electing the president? Next, we'll show you the problems caused by the Electoral College, problems that a direct popular vote would easily solve, and then we'll review the top arguments given in favor of the Electoral College system and why each of those reasons are actually based on common myths. Finally, we'll explain what needs to be done to abolish the Electoral College, an amendment to the U.S. Constitution, and what we can do now to make that happen. And we'll do all this with plenty of time left to answer your questions. So please jot down your questions as we go through the program so you can ask them at the end of the presentation. So what is the Electoral College? First of all, the Electoral College isn't a school or a building or a place. I think we're ready now. So first of all, the Electoral College isn't a school or a building or a place. It's a group of 538 people who elect the president and the vice president of the United States every 4 years. According to the U.S. Constitution, each state legislature gets to decide how their electors will be chosen. In the beginning of our country, state legislators just picked the electors themselves. Over time, states started choosing electors by popular vote within their state. Each political party has their own slate of electors. When you vote in November, you are not voting directly for the presidential candidate. You are voting for a group of state electors from the candidate's political party who have pledged to give their electoral votes to that candidate. Each state gets a specific number of electors based on their congressional delegation, one elector for each U.S. senator and each U.S. representative. For example, Texas has 38 electoral votes in 2020, while Rhode Island had 4. The District of Columbia, although not a state, does get 3 electors. Importantly, the winner of the Electoral College is not whoever gets the most electoral votes. The winner must have a majority of the votes, over 50% of the votes to win. Currently, that's 270 electoral votes to win. If no candidate gets 270 votes, the U.S. House of Representatives chooses the president with each state getting one vote, and the Senate chooses the vice president with each senator getting one vote. So now I'm looking for the buttons to press there. Since 1970, the League's position has been that direct popular vote method for electing the president and vice president is essential to a representative government. The League of Women Voters believes, therefore, that the Electoral College should be abolished. The rest of this presentation will explain the many problems with the Electoral College that the League has identified. You may have heard about some of these problems, but there are some that you may not have heard very much about. More recently, in 2010, LWVUS added support for the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact until the abolition of the Electoral College is achieved. The National Popular Vote Interstate Compact is an agreement among states to award all their electoral votes to whichever presidential ticket wins the overall popular vote in 50 states plus District of Columbia. This is achieved through passing the NPVC bill in enough states to add up to 270 electoral votes. You can find out more about the compact on LWVUS's website. Now, the rest of tonight's presentation, we're going to explain the many problems with the Electoral College, and that would be solved by abolishing the Electoral College. So let's jump into what's wrong with the Electoral College and how a direct popular vote for president will solve each and every one of these problems. To start, we're going to go back to the very beginning. The Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, during the long hot summer of 1787. This was just after the American rebels won independence from England, and the newborn country needed a national constitution to determine how it would be governed. Each of the original 13 states could send delegates to represent them at this constitutional convention. 55 delegates attended, representing 12 of the original 13 colonies. The delegates included many famous men that you all know, George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, James Madison, John Adams, and Alexander Hamilton. I'm not going to break into a rap for Alexander Hamilton. These men faced the task of creating a new national system of government, and there were many fierce debates and arguments. How to elect a president was one of the first arguments to arise, and it was the last one to be resolved, through a compromise idea that ultimately came to be called the Electoral College. So why was the Electoral College created? One major reason is slavery. The Electoral College was a compromise designed to give Southern states more voting power in presidential elections based on counting each enslaved person as 3/5 of a free person. This 3/5 compromise had already been used to increase the number of representatives given to the Southern states in the U.S. House of Representatives. Because the Electoral College is based on the number of members that each state has in the U.S. Congress, it carried this infamous math into the presidential elections. This rift between the North and the South was not because there were more people living in the northern states than in the southern states. In fact, you can see on the chart that the northern and southern states had essentially the same population in the late 1700s, about 1.8 million people. However, the southern states had a much smaller voting population than the northern states, because over a third of the southern states' population was enslaved. As a result, The Southern states adamantly refused a direct popular vote for president. Before the convention, everyone expected that there would be battles between smaller versus larger population states. But as Madison wrote about halfway through the convention, and I quote, "It seems now to be pretty well understood that the real difference of interests lies not between the large and the small, but between the northern and the southern states. The institution of slavery and its consequences form the line of discrimination," end quote. If racism of the Electoral College had ended when slavery ended, we might not be having this conversation now. But the Electoral College continued to silence Black votes after the Civil War. Right after the Civil War, there was a brief period called Reconstruction, when federal troops were stationed in the South to enforce the newly won civil rights of the formerly enslaved Americans. During Reconstruction, Black men voted and the first Black representatives served in Congress. But then came the election of 1876, which was just a mess. Records are a bit murky, but it's pretty clear that Samuel J. Tilden won the popular vote for president over Rutherford B. Hayes. However, there were allegations of voter fraud in 4 states: Florida, North Carolina, yeah, Louisiana, and Oregon. History does repeat, right? Both sides claimed victory. As a result, Tilden didn't get the majority in the Electoral College. So the two parties came up with a compromise that traded the newly awarded rights of the Black people to share up the malfunctioning Electoral College. This compromise allowed Hayes to become president in exchange for the removal of federal troops from the South. The states of the former Confederacy were once again allowed to rule themselves, and they quickly started passing a series of laws commonly known as the Jim Crow laws. During the Jim Crow era, the voting rights of Black people were systematically destroyed by state laws and local ordinances, like poll taxes and literacy tests. The Jim Crow era lasted almost 100 years until the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. So the Electoral College was created because of slavery, and the failure of the Electoral College in 1876 allowed slavery to flourish. Unfortunately, the racist impact of the Electoral College didn't end with the Voting Rights Act. The Electoral College continues to suppress the voice of Black Americans. That's because states with higher percentage of Black residents tend to have less power in the Electoral College, while states with wider populations tend to have more power. For this analysis, Electoral College power is defined as the number of people it takes within a state for each electoral vote. If it takes fewer people to make up one electoral vote, the electoral power is stronger. For example, on the chart on the left, in states that are more than 85% white, it's about 400,000 people per each electoral vote. But in states where there are more than 15% Black, higher than the national average, it's almost 650,000 people per electoral vote. If you do the math, 644 divided by 656 divided by 398,887, you've all done that in your heads now, right? That means it takes 1.6 votes in states with high Black populations to equal 1 vote in states with higher white populations. This is a simple analysis based on the 2020 census data. However, a more sophisticated statistical analysis done by William Black from the University of Maryland in 2019 came to the same conclusion. His analysis, quote, of every election from 2000 on indicates the Electoral College has consistently awarded more votes per capita to states with wider populations, end quote. Again, the Electoral College may not be trying to mute Black voters, but it is having that impact simply because of how our Black and white populations are distributed across the states. Perhaps this will naturally reduce over time, but a direct popular vote would immediately eliminate the racist impact by making every voter count as one vote, regardless of race or any other demographic. A lot of people these days are not aware of the racism that's been part of the Electoral College from the beginning, yet they are aware of other issues with the system. So, what do most people dislike about the Electoral College? The problem we hear from most people is that the Electoral College turns losers into winners. 5 times in our history, the Electoral College has awarded the presidency to candidates who lost the popular vote. This happened 3 times in the 1800s and twice in this century, 2016 and 2000. A direct popular vote for president would ensure that the candidates who gets the most votes from the people would actually become the president. I'm having trouble seeing the, here it is. Another problem is that the Electoral College violates the principle of one person, one vote. It makes some votes count more than others, depending on where the voter happens to live. That's because the number of electoral votes given to a state isn't exactly proportional to its population. No matter how many people live in a state, it gets 2 electoral votes based on its 2 senators. So voters from smaller states have their votes weighed more heavily in one electoral college than the votes from larger states. For example, you can see in the table on the left that 1 vote in Wyoming counts as much as almost 4 votes in Florida. Wyoming has 3 electoral votes, or 1 electoral vote for every 192,000 people. Florida is a bigger state and it has 29 electoral votes. That's 1 electoral vote for every 743,000 people in Florida. So if you do the math, in the Electoral College, it takes nearly 4 popular votes in Florida to equal 1 popular vote in Wyoming. This plays out in other small and large matchups, like Wyoming, Vermont, or Alaska, whose electoral votes count as much as 3 or 4 votes in states like Florida, Texas, or California. A fundamental principle of the United States is that one person has 1 vote. This is the standard for every other election in this country, and it should be 1 person, 1 vote in our presidential elections. And that's exactly how it would be with a direct popular vote for president. Regardless of how many votes are weighed in the Electoral College, we all know by now that only a few states really matter in presidential elections. These are so-called swing states, where the outcome of the vote is considered to be up for grabs. The rest of the states are considered safe states, where the feeling is that the election result is obvious. The map here shows the swing states from the 2020 election. The top 6 swing states are in dark purple: Arizona, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Florida. Then there are another 7 states shown in lighter purple. Together, these swing states got almost all the TV ads and presidential campaigns. And in fact, 100% of the TV ads and 98% of the campaign events for 2020 general election presidential campaigns were in those states. They get all the candidates' attention, and even worse, that means they have a much greater influence over the candidates' policy decisions in positions. With direct election by popular vote, candidates would be forced to pay attention to the whole country, not just a handful of swing states. All 50 states and the District of Columbia would require consideration from presidential candidates. The Electoral College not only makes some votes matter more than others, it gives people a reason not to vote. I actually heard that tonight from someone. It actually decreases voter turnout in so-called safe states. Data from 2016 and 2007 and 2020 prove this. In the graph, you can see the percentage of eligible votes who cast a vote for president. Oh.
That feature's not working.
Um, my director over here.
Yes.
Okay, so just hit me when it's time to go forward.
Yeah. This didn't work, this little animation, but we're not ready for.
Okay.
So you'll have to talk. I'm gonna hand out the green checks.
Okay. In the graph that you can't see, that a percentage of eligible voters who cast a vote for president was significantly lower in safe states compared to swing states. These differences may seem small, only 6 or 7 percentage points, but that translates into 15 million registered voters in non-swing states who choose not to vote in 2016, and 22 million registered voters who choose not to vote in 2020. That's more than enough to change a presidential election. This is a nonpartisan issue affecting both major parties. If I'm a Republican voter in a blue state or a Democrat voter in a red state, I feel like my vote for president never counts. So why bother? On the flip side, Republican voters in red states and Democrat voters in blue states feel like their party doesn't really need their vote. So millions of people just don't vote. A direct popular vote will increase voter turnout by making every vote count and count equally. As we saw in the 2020 election and its aftermath, the Electoral College also leaves our presidential elections more vulnerable to manipulation and even outright fraud. The Electoral College provides partisan operatives with a roadmap for overturning election results. In 2020, that created a desire to find an additional 38 electoral votes instead of over 3.5 million votes. If a winner were chosen by popular vote, and the Electoral College showed where it would be easiest to gain those electoral votes by finding fewer than 43,000 ballots in just 3 states, Arizona, Georgia, and Wisconsin. That's all it would have taken to overturn the results of the 2020 presidential election. So those are 6 major problems with the Electoral College, and each of them would be fixed by using a direct popular vote to elect the president. You may be convinced by now, but not everybody is. So after outlining all of these problems with the Electoral College, we hear some folks who say, even if this is true, here's why the Electoral College still makes sense. We'd like to walk through the most common reasons why some people continue to support the Electoral College. These are not just fringe theories, by the way. These are the main points that supporters of the Electoral College use to defend this undemocratic system. And none of them stand up under scrutiny. They are actually myths that do not stand up to the facts. So let's bust those myths now. Electoral College myth number 1. Without the Electoral College, our presidents would be chosen by just a couple of big states, like California and New York. We decided to run through some numbers to see what a direct popular vote would look like. The first thing we noticed is that both Texas and Florida are larger than New York. Second, we could see that every state has a mixture of Republican and Democratic voters. With this in mind, we then zeroed in on how many states it realistically takes to win the popular vote. So you can see, Rosemary's just passed out this graph to you so you can look at it in person as well as on the screen. Here are the popular votes per state for Barack Obama in 2012, starting with California on the left and adding the Obama votes from each state. In 2012, Obama had to get over 63 million votes to win the direct popular vote. And you can see that it takes 39 states to get him there. That's a large majority of the states, not just a handful. The fact is that the direct election by popular vote means that votes from most or all of the states would be needed to win the presidency. And every vote would count and count the same, no matter where the voter lives. Electoral College myth number 2. After seeing these facts about states, believers in the Electoral College will bring up a similar myth that without the Electoral College, our presidents would all be chosen by just a few big cities like New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago. Once again, statistics tell a different story. These pie charts show the percentage of voting age adults who live in big cities. As seen on the first chart on the left, the combined voting age population of New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago is just 5% of the national vote age population. That's certainly not enough to decide an election. So we expanded to the top 10 cities, those with over 1 million residents, and that adds up to just 8% of the voting age population. Even when we went to 50 biggest cities, they make up just 15% of the voting age population in this country. That's about the same size as the rural population in our country. There just aren't enough people living in big cities to decide our president on their own. Most people, 71% in this country, live in smaller towns and suburban areas. It is simply mathematically impossible for an election by popular vote to be determined by just the largest states or the largest cities. Once again, direct election by popular vote would ensure that every person is equally represented, regardless of where they live. Myth number 3. Abolishing the Electoral College will only benefit Democratic candidates. To bust this myth, let's look at the 2004 presidential election, the Bush-Kerry decision. On the left is the Electoral College map for the 2004 election, where George W. Bush won over John Kerry with 3 million more popular votes than Kerry. The map on the right shows how close George W. Bush came to winning the popular vote, but losing the electoral vote. Can you spot the difference? It's just one state, Ohio. If John Kerry had received only 119,000 more votes in Ohio, he would have won the Electoral College and the election, even though Bush would still have nearly 3 million more popular votes. The fact is, the Electoral College can hurt either of our two major political parties. This is truly a nonpartisan issue. Electoral College myth number 4. Perhaps the biggest obstacle to eliminating the Electoral College is just plain pessimism. Many people feel that the Electoral College will never be abolished because it would take a constitutional amendment to do it. So they say it's never going to happen. We need to defeat this defeatism. Here's a timeline showing the dates that all constitutional amendments were ratified. The Bill of Rights is shown with just one bar, by the way. You can see that our history includes flurries of constitutional activity, punctuated by long periods of inactivity. There was a period of 60 years between the first two clumps, then another gap of 43 years. There were 18 years between the amendments of the 1930s and those of the 1950s and 60s, then a gap of 21 years to the 27th Amendment in 1992. It has been 30 years since we've amended the Constitution. What distinguishes these periods of constitutional activity? They tended to be periods of great national political activity, where citizens were feeling that our democracy was in crisis, where the demand for political change across the society was persistent and loud. There was the period after the Civil War, the Progressive era, and the turn of the last century, and the Civil Rights era of the 50s and 60s. We seem to be in the middle of another period of political activity, of demand for change. Only time will tell, but the level of engagement we are seeing now and the genuine concerns about the resilience of our democracy are remarkable. So what needs to be done? So let's focus on our goal, abolishing the Electoral College by amending the Constitution. What will it take to get there? A constitutional amendment. Our ultimate goal is a constitutional amendment to abolish the Electoral College and use a direct popular vote to elect our president. This is how we amend the Constitution. First, a bill to propose an amendment needs to pass both the U.S. House and the Senate by 2/3 vote in each house. That's not easy, nor should it be. Then the proposed amendment needs to be ratified by 3/4 of the state legislatures. That's 38 states. Again, not easy. But remember, it's been done 27 times, and we can do it again. Please note that it doesn't require, and the League would not support, a constitutional convention, which is another method of the states approving a constitutional amendment. The usual amendment process outlined that I just outlined would do the job of abolishing the Electoral College. Congress took action between 1969 and 1970 to abolish the Electoral College, actually. There was a ton of momentum at that time because in the 1968 election, a third-party candidate, George Wallace, got 46 votes in the Electoral College. Both Democrats and Republicans were worried that Wallace's popularity could have resulted with neither Richard Nixon nor Hubert Humphrey getting the required 270 votes in the Electoral College to win the election. A Gallup poll at the time shows a whopping 81% of Americans supported abolishing the Electoral College. And a bill to amend the Constitution passed the House of Representatives by a huge bipartisan margin of 338 to 70. However, the bill died in the Senate when it was filibustered by Southern Democrats, who feared once again their states would lose power in presidential elections because of their traditionally low voter turnout. Similar bills have been introduced as recently as 2021, but there has been no vote on those bills. We believe this issue lacks momentum because of the defeatist attitude that it's never going to happen. So that's what we need to change. We need to change the momentum and the belief that we can change this system. The League of Women Voters is uniquely positioned to empower voters through education and advocacy at the local, state, and national levels. This is what we do. We engage with voters, provide them with the information and education they need about elections and issues. And then, armed with this education, the League can activate voters to bring this momentum to Congress when the time is right. I hope you're totally convinced that we need to abolish the Electoral College so that the person who gets the most votes wins our presidential elections. Let's start with the easiest thing. Just talk about it. Tell your family and friends what you heard tonight about the harm the Electoral College is doing to our country. Feel free to use your own words or use the frequently asked questions or other crib sheets that are out at the desk outside the auditorium here. Your goal, should you choose to accept it, is to tell at least 3 people, but more is even better. Another easy thing you can do is post on social media about the League's one person, one vote campaign. You can make up your own posts if you're good at that, but you can also download posts at the League's website at www.lwv.org/OPOV. And finally, you can arrange to give this presentation to other groups. If you're a member of the League of Women Voters, you can, of here in McHenry County, they're welcome to visit your Rotary, your library, or other service organizations. The presentation and script are available to all League members, and the League committee will make it easy for you. So that's it. 3 easy things that you can do now to spread the word. We need to abolish the Electoral College and elect our president by popular vote. So thank you so much for your attention, and we're happy now to take your questions.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay. That's okay.
It worked out. We got
Yeah.
the hand out.
So, do we have any questions? Those online, please feel free to use the chat. Those here in the audience, you have a cards. I see some cards being raised. Okay. Oh, the red thing. There we go. Thank you. Oh, I don't want to look at that. And I have our expert here, Rosemary, who's one of the founding members of the Abolish the Electoral College Committee with me here on the stage. And so I'm going to rely on her expertise. So. I don't see any questions on the Q&A. I'm going to close that down. Here we go. Wasn't it beautiful today?
We're waiting. I think they're going to bring the
You have to
card
come
up,
here.
so you have to write your question on a card.
So, well, what are we going to do about petitions? Right now, we're not at that stage yet. We're trying to do the education first, and then our second stage will be to ask people to write their senators and their House of Representatives in Congress and ask them to submit a bill. And then, should we need to, we can start doing petitions. I don't want to say that this is a long off process, but we need to make sure our timing is right. Right now, everybody's mind is filled with other things. So we'll probably talk more about going forward after January. Is that right?
Well,
See, the expert here, I told him. Okay. Okay, I'm going to move over and share the mic with Rosemary. When we say our country is a democracy within a republic, does that refer to the electorate,
To the Electoral College.
to the Electoral College?
Well, huh, the Electoral College is not democratic at all, actually. If you think about it, this is the history of the state legislatures actually have complete control to decide how to appoint the electors. So in the early years, the state legislatures just picked some people, some men, of course, in those days. They picked a group of men and they got together. And of course, their first choice was George Washington. So that was easy. So everybody agreed with that. But then pretty soon, when the Federalists and Thomas Jefferson's party started dividing the population already in those early years, then the choice of the electors became more of a problem. And some of the states said, well, let's have the people vote for the electors as we do today. Some of the states said, well, let's divide it up, so by congressional district, and then each congressional district can vote for an elector, and then we'll have 2 electors that are elected statewide, which is how Maine and Nebraska still do it today. But New Jersey, for example, in the 1812 election, they had given the vote to president to the people of New Jersey, and the people of New Jersey were planning to vote in 1812. But then a new legislature was elected 2 weeks before the election. And the new legislature said, nah, let's not let the people vote. Let's just pick the electors ourselves. And they did. They took the vote back from the people and chose the electors themselves. This has not changed in the Electoral College system. Now, if they tried to do it in a state like Illinois, if they tried to take the vote back from the people, it would be, probably the end of their political career. But under the United States Constitution, they actually still have that right. So that's one of the very undemocratic aspects of the Electoral College that does reflect the idea of a republic. Some people like to think that republic is separate from democracy. We think we have a democracy, but this relic is really the most undemocratic relic of our early days. And we've had a professor, we've had a few speakers at our committee, and one of the most renowned professors said, let's give the founders a break. They were trying to start a brand new country. No one had ever done anything like this before. It was in the days of kings, to break away from a large, powerful country like England. And they were all rebels. They were all traitors. And then to start your own country and figure out how you're going to do it from scratch, they did a pretty good job. So we have to forgive them some of these compromises that they had to make just to get the country off the ground. But the Electoral College is a relic that needs to be changed. And the founders did put the ability to make amendments into the Constitution. So they knew that there might be a need for changes. And so we think this is, in fact, they had to tweak this just right off the bat in the early days. So that's why this is thoroughly a democratic decision, is to abolish it and just let everybody vote, count all the votes, and whoever wins, wins. Don't go away.
Don't go away. So if this discussion has been going on since 1970, how much longer do you anticipate this is going to take to accomplish? And second part, has the league ever attempted a change of this magnitude before?
Oh, well, You know, the League was founded by the suffragists. So we were founded by the biggest change of all, which was giving women the vote. So that's our history. The League women, the women who were the suffragists, when they got the vote, they were meeting in the Congress Hotel. They adjourned their organization and they went downstairs to another room and they reopened the meeting and formed the League of Women Voters in the Congress Hotel in 1920 in Chicago. So that was the biggest, yay. That was the biggest change that the League, and this change here would be big, but we've done, we're founded on the principle of making good, big changes in our country. So I think that we could, but what was the other part? There was another part I wanted to address to that question. What was the first part, Barb? Oh, when? Okay. So, this is that defeatism that we run across. Oh, it can never happen. How can you get 2/3 of each house? How can you get 3/4 of the states? They're never going to want to give up, blah, blah, blah. Well, first of all, we know that right now, this is not the time for trying to persuade Congress to pass this resolution because, as Barb said, there's so many other things on their minds. But if something were to happen that would shock the country and shock the Congress, the time it almost passed in 1970 was because George Wallace almost threw off the election so that it would have gone into the House of Representatives. Now, as Barb said, if it goes into the House of Representatives because there's a strong third-party candidate, or even if it's so close that it's a tie, there's some scenarios where it could actually be a tie, 269 to 269. Don't forget, each state gets one vote in the House for president. So all 53 delegates, representatives in California have to sit together and figure out who's going to get their one vote. That guy in Wyoming, one vote. All the representatives in Illinois, we have 17 now, have to get together and they have one vote. That guy in Alaska, one vote. So if by some chance, and the vice president goes into the Senate, now it is still possible. Now the Senate picks from the two highest vote getters, and each senator gets a vote. So it's also conceivable that the House would pick one party person and that the Senate could pick someone from the other party. So personally, I think if something like that happened, people would be like, what? What? How could that be? What is the matter? This can't, I think it would shock everybody. And that could happen at any election. It could happen this fall. It could happen in 20 years. And I think when we have a crisis like that, then all of a sudden, boom, an amendment is on the front burner, I think.
Well, and I'll just add that if it would go to the House and to the Senate, Washington, D.C., which has a larger population than Wyoming, would actually have no representation because they don't have any representatives or senators in Congress. So we would be disenfranchising us, 600,000 to 700,000 people more than the state of Wyoming. So,
Yeah, absolutely.
So your next question is, oh no, you're doing so well. Okay. What assurances do we have that the electors will not be faithless electors? And they said illegally influenced, but we would also call them faithless electors.
Right. Well, actually, the Supreme Court recently upheld that the states can determine how they're going to handle. So faithless elector, let's say Illinois. Okay, Illinois went 3.5 million for Biden and 2.5 million for Trump. So then Illinois authorized its Democratic electors, of which there were 19, or is that the new number? Anyway, 19, let's say. And let's say one of them said, nah, I'm not going to vote for Biden. He's going to win anyway. I want to vote for Jill Stein, because she's a good woman and, I'm environmentalist. So some states, they allow their electors to do that. It's up to the state. So I don't know which states, and I don't actually know what Illinois' law is. So some states, it's about a third, they allow their electors to cast a vote different than what they were assigned. Now, mind you, who are the electors in Illinois? They're people that have proven their loyalty to the Democratic Party over their whole lifetimes. So this is past mayors, it's past governors, it's wives of legislators, it's precinct committeemen who've been in the trenches for 30 years. If one of them went and did not vote for the Democrat and voted for somebody else, they wouldn't be able to show their face in their town. They'd have to leave town because these are the party regulars that get this job. So the likelihood of someone doing it is very unlikely. Now, some states actually prohibit it and have a fine and a possible jail term if they try to do that. So that's about another third or so. And then some of them, like Colorado, which was the case that went to the Supreme Court, what they did and which the court upheld was when the gentleman was not voting the way he was assigned to vote, they just told him he had to leave and they would get somebody else. And so and the court said, yes, they could do that. So in some states, they'll just remove the person from, because they're sitting together in the state house when they do this, they just remove the person from his seat and they say, where's the backup? Bring them in. And then they have somebody else do it. So that's faithless electors. So it's not really a problem currently. There were some of us tried to write letters to people in the past, but nobody listened.
So the next question is going to let you expand on what I said about when this could pass. Someone asks, do nothing Congress, when do you, LWV, plan on reintroducing the bill? Or has there been any current members of Congress that have indicated an interest? And this is a three-parter, so we're lucky it's early in the evening. Yeah. Do we need to get rid of the filibuster to gain support to get this through?
Well, all right. Yeah. Okay. So, no, the league is not promoting this anytime soon. And really, I think they're right in that what we need to do is build education among the population, because I'm hoping that there were some things you learned tonight that you didn't realize. And I think once people realize some of these drawbacks of the Electoral College and start understanding, it's more than just the wrong person, winning. It's all these other undemocratic possibilities that they will want, and they would just want to have one person, one vote, and everybody votes and they just count and whoever wins, wins. But it takes a lot to convince people or to explain it to people. It's not easy. It takes concentration and it takes looking into it and hearing about it and thinking about it. So we have a big education job ahead of us. And in connection with that, where you talk about talking to people, one of my early presentations, my girlfriend Carol came. It was Oak Park River Forest, and her sister Diane lives near there. So she brought Diane along. So at the end of it, I said, okay, now you should go out and talk to people, bring it up, say, oh, I heard this interesting program last night. It was about the Electoral College. And even if someone doesn't agree, at least you spent 5 minutes talking about the subject. So Carol told me later that at Christmas, they had one of these, big Italian family dinners at Carol's house. And there was a lull in the conversation, and Diane pipes up, so what about that Electoral College, right in the middle of dinner. So, but that's the idea, is you keep talking about it so that, because the biggest problem since 1970 has been that after every election, people talk about it for a day or two, and then it just falls into the background. Now, this time around, you're hearing more and more about it. The comics make jokes about it, and there are articles in the papers about it. So I think that there is more interest. And if we can educate, and that's why we're working through the League of Women Voters, because we went to convention. They're league members from all 50 states and the District of Columbia. They heard our presentations. They come to our committee to our committee meetings on Zoom. We had 250 people from different states that signed up to get our mailings. At our last meeting, we had 70 people attending from 20 different states plus the District of Columbia, and a certain number of those are going to go out in their states and give this same presentation. So that's the grassroots nature of the league. So I think that we can do that. So that's, and then the individuals, we're not even talking about that yet. Yeah.
Okay, so I think we have time for two more questions. And and one comment. Someone put a thought. The 1929 legislation limited the number of House of Representatives. And so why don't we just increase the number of House of Representatives to make it representative in the Electoral College? Now, I'll let you take this one because I can't remember the exact number of what the House would be now at that point if we did it.
I know, but I've heard that argument, and actually it's one of the reforms. No, I'm not going to say it's a bad idea. Sure, you'd have a big house, but increasing the number of representatives, even the Electoral College aside, the way it works is like, I don't know how to say this simply. You have a certain number of representatives in your state, you know, until you get up to a certain another number, and then you get one more. But the numbers in between are large. So some states have more people represented by one guy than other states do. Already it's unfair aside from the Electoral College. So that's been suggested as a reform. I don't, it's not a bad idea.
You know, every 10 years, the census is done, and that's when they decide how many representatives and senators you got. And right now, the count is one representative for every 700,000 people. When the House was originally formed, if we use those same numbers, the House of Representatives would be over 1,500 members. And if we, as the questioner who wrote Do Nothing Congress before, imagine a building that would hold 1,500 representatives. So they have to work out some sort of system. But anyway, I just thought I'd throw in my census knowledge there.
I mean, that's if you went at the same rate,
Right.
you know.
Okay, so our last question. Does the Electoral College negatively impact the Latino population as well? Approximately 19% of the US population. If 14% are rural and 15% big city, would that mean small towns and suburbs would actually decide the election? 71%. And this is the question you'll probably want to answer first. What percent of Americans now support the abolishing of the Electoral College?
The latest Pew research, I think, was 62% support.
I saw this morning 80.
Really? That high? Now, is that okay? Well,
But
that
We
surprises
don't know
me.
what the sample survey is. We don't know where they got their numbers.
Well, and you know what else? They changed the wording from, yeah, so, oh, I'm surprised it's that high. So as far as other Hispanic and other populations who often live in big cities, so it's the larger states that have less impact per person. But you know, the answer is it's all the swing states again. It really is. In Illinois, I tell people, you know, in Illinois, if you're in favor of a third party candidate or a Republican, why vote? Because it's probably going to go Democratic. And if you're a Democrat, why vote? Because it'll go Democratic without you, probably. I mean, we went for Reagan, so it's not for sure, but you know, that's been the recent history. And so these safe states, that's what the league really dislikes, is that people don't feel they're not interested in voting. It loses its appeal. Then they don't go out to vote for president, and then they don't vote for the other offices either. So I will tell one of my stories. I always have to tell a story. So when I was a teenager, because some of you might remember this, in Chicago, under the Fairness Doctrine, one of the news stations at 10:30 allotted a minute for people to make a statement about some issue of the day. But because of the fairness doctrine, the next night they had someone from the other side. I don't know if any of you remember this. So I remember my sister and I were sitting watching this, week after week. And then one night the League of Women Voters came on. And so I was, a teenager. I was 15, 16, 17, something like that. And the League of Women Voters came on for their minute and they said, everybody, we want you to vote. It's very important. Get out. And I was like, wow, that's what the league is about, is voting. And I clearly remember turning to Tony and saying, who are they going to find that's against voting? And sure enough, the next night they rounded up some guy who said he was an anarchist. Don't vote, don't support this government, don't be part of it. So I don't know if he was real or not. But at that age, I knew that the league wants people to vote. And this system is a what's the word I want?
Disproportionate.
No. It makes you not want to vote.
Oh.
Yes.
Disincentivized.
Disincentivizes voting. Anything short?
Now you can see why we're a team. We think
Yes.
for each other. I just want to clarify the poll results that I saw. It was a political party poll. So one party was in favor by 80%, the other party was in favor by 60%. But the national average is in the 60s in favor of eliminating the Electoral College. So thank you so much for having us. We hope you learned a lot. We'll stick around if you have any additional questions. There were a couple questions that I couldn't read your handwriting, so we will be here to answer those in person. And don't forget to get your handouts out at the table. So thank you.